Overshadowed by the fame of World War I is the story of the American intervention in the Russian Civil War. 9,000 Americans, many from Michigan, fought the Bolsheviks in Siberia from 1918 to 1920. It was conducted in secret and ignited decades of ideological warfare. While World War I was a total war, the sideshow, the Polar Bear Expedition, was not. In a total war, even the home front helps with the war effort and society is severely disrupted. This was true of the Great War, but not the small, secretive Polar Bear Expedition, as we shall see. In the Russian Revolution, peasants and soldiers overthrew their autocratic government. In October of 1917, radical socialists called Bolsheviks seized power. However, the Bolshevik Red Army faced opposition from the anti-Bolshevik White Army, and civil war began. The Bolsheviks made peace with Germany in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. The Allies, however, needed Russia to remain in the war to keep Germany busy on two fronts, and realized intervention was needed. President Wilson, though, was hesitant to interfere in Russia's internal affairs. He was afraid intervention would push the Soviets closer to Germany. It could antagonize the Russians and even restore the Tsar. However, the rise of Bolshevism worried Wilson as well. People felt Bolshevism was a threat to Allied victory and to American unity and stability. They feared Soviet propaganda, which called for a worldwide proletarian revolution. Initially, the public was in favor of intervention in Russia's civil war to combat Bolshevism and distract Germans from the Western Front. Wilson began intervening indirectly. America diplomatically ostracized the new Bolshevik government and financially supported anti-Bolshevik forces and propaganda campaigns. Few Americans knew about this. In fact, Wilson kept nearly everything secret from the public. The Bolsheviks criticized the whites for relying on America's help. Pressures at home and from the Allies led Wilson to authorize, in May of 1918, a limited defensive operation in Russia, the American North Russian Expeditionary Force. This included the 339th Infantry Regiment, or the Polar Bears, from Detroit. Over 9,000 American troops joined British, French, Italian, Chinese, Canadian, and Japanese forces. America's ill-defined goals were to protect vital ammunition and supply depots and to secure communication lines and northern Soviet ports. Unknown to the public, the soldiers in Siberia suffered through horrifying conditions in subarctic temperatures. No one was clear on what exactly their mission was.
Archangel represented the main strategic headquarters of the Allied campaign during the Polar Bear Expedition. The port was taken by the Allies in 1918 from a weak Bolshevik force. Of the forces at Archangel, about 40% were American troops. In comparison to the totality of immersion that American troops and the country as a whole had in World War I, this side mission was secretive and small in scale. The original plan was simply to guard supplies that might be needed for those fighting the Red Army, but when the Civil War grew into a fury in the fall of 1918, that plan changed. The Allied forces embarked on a mission to capture a Trans-Siberian Railroad junction in Vyatka, a journey 600 miles to the southeast of the Archangel port. Though the Red Army had been unable to prevent the Allies from taking the port, it was stronger and better organized when Allied forces tried to take the railroad link. Their journey was stopped about halfway into the mission, leaving a front of 450 miles for the American 339th Infantry to defend. Luckily, skirmishes were relatively small in scale, but they did continue until the winter of 1918. Between the winter of 1918 and June of 1919, things were mostly peaceful along the front. During this time, many soldiers and the Americans at home grew discontent with the Russian front. There was little hope for restoring the old regime. The motives for the mission were still unclear, and there was no strategy. The mission was deemed a failure. The growing Red Army had put to a halt the only plans the Allies had. As a result, troops were brought back home in June of 1919. The Allied intervention in Russia was not a total war. Historian R.W. Daly describes the expedition as an ambiguous venture. U.S. soldiers came from only a handful of states. There were no large battles relative to the catastrophic fights of World War I, and most of the public was unaware of the expeditionary force. The Great War defined daily life for a whole nation, making it a total war. The Polar Bear Expedition, in contrast, was secretive and small. Not a total war, but an offshoot of one.